Emily Johnson, at just 23 years old, had experienced more hardship than most could imagine. Her life had been marked by an unthinkable loss. Both her parents had passed away when she was just a teenager. The sudden deaths of her mother and father left her alone in the world with no family to turn to for help. She had been a bright, hopeful young girl with dreams for the future, but everything changed after their passing. Without any siblings or extended family to rely on, she found herself in a whirlwind of grief and uncertainty. The world she had known was gone, and she was forced to navigate a harsh new reality where survival became her only focus. Emily quickly learned that life doesn't stop for tragedy, and she had no choice but to pick up the pieces and keep moving forward, despite the overwhelming pain she felt. Determined to make a living, Emily took on a variety of low-paying jobs, cleaning homes, selling small goods in the local markets, and even running errands for elderly women in the neighborhood became part of her daily routine. Despite the exhausting work and the meager pay, she always tried to keep her head up. Each job, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed, was a step toward survival. After years of scraping by, Emily was lucky enough to land a cleaning job in a large office building. It wasn't glamorous and the pay was still minimal, but it provided a steady income. For the first time in years, Emily felt like she could breathe a little easier. She didn't have much, but she had a job, and she was thankful for it. It wasn't the life she had imagined, but it was her life, and she was determined to make it work. One rainy morning, as Emily walked to work, the streets seemed darker and colder than usual. The rain had been pouring for hours, and she clutched her worn umbrella tightly, trying to shield herself from the downpour. Her shoes splashed through the puddles, and her thin jacket did little to protect her from the chill. But Emily was used to it. Life had taught her to keep going, no matter the circumstances. As she approached the gates of the building where she worked, something caught her eye. Sitting alone on a low concrete block by the side of the road was a man soaked to the bone. His clothes were in tatters, his hair matted with rainwater, and he had no umbrella to protect himself. The man, who appeared to be blind, sat there quietly, his face pale from the cold. People rushed by, oblivious to his presence, some even glancing at him with disgust or pity, but no one stopped to help. It was as if he didn't exist. Emily paused for a moment, watching the man, and her heart twisted. She could see the desperation in his eyes as he sat there abandoned by the world around him. Without thinking, she took a step toward him. As she did, a young boy quickly ran past, snatching something from the man's side. The man, confused, reached for his cane and adjusted his dark glasses, realizing he had been robbed. Emily's instincts kicked in. She couldn't just stand by and let this happen. The boy ran down the sidewalk, clutching the wallet in his hand, but Emily wasn't about to let him get away. She dashed after him, her slippers splashing through the wet streets as she ran. Her heart raced her breath, coming in short gasps, but she wasn't about to stop. She had seen the helplessness in the man's eyes, and she couldn't leave him like this. With determination, Emily chased the thief, weaving through the crowd, her clothes soaked and her feet slipping on the slick pavement. At the corner of the street, she caught up with the boy, grabbing the back of his shirt and pulling him down. The wallet fell from his hand, and he quickly fled, disappearing into the crowd. Emily picked it up, panting from the chase, and turned back to the man who was still sitting on the concrete block. His face remained calm but tired, as if he hadn't even noticed the commotion. She approached him gently, placing her hand on his arm. "Sir," she said softly, "I got your wallet back." The man turned slightly toward her voice, his expression still distant but grateful. "You ran after him?" he asked, his voice deep but gentle. Emily nodded, offering him the wallet. "Yes," she replied, "it's all yours now." The man's grip tightened around the wallet, and for a moment they stood there in the rain, silent except for the soft patter of water around them. In the midst of the storm, Emily felt a quiet warmth inside her. She had done something good, something that felt right, even though she had nothing to gain. She didn't expect anything in return, but as she looked at the man in front of her, she realized that despite everything she had lost in life, she still had the ability to help others. It was a small gesture, but to him it meant the world. The man looked at her with gratitude in his eyes and spoke softly. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to do that." Emily smiled, though he couldn't see it. "It was the right thing to do," she replied, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. The rain continued to pour, but in that moment, Emily knew that no matter how hard life had been, she still had the power to make a difference. After their brief encounter in the rain, Emily couldn't shake the image of James, the blind man she had helped. When she returned to her tiny apartment that night, the weight of the day seemed to crash down on her all at once. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for some reason her thoughts kept returning to him. James hadn't asked for anything, but he seemed so vulnerable, so out of place in a world that had forgotten him. Emily's heart ached as she thought about how many people had walked past him, treating him as though he were invisible, and yet she had stopped. She had chased down the thief who stole his wallet, given him food, and even offered him shelter. It wasn't much. Her apartment was cramped, the floors cold and bare, but it was all she could offer. And that night, it felt like the right thing to do. The next day, as Emily prepared to leave for work, she felt a slight hesitation. She hadn't expected to see James again, but part of her wondered how he was doing. She had given him some of her last money, a small amount meant for her lunch, and hoped that it would be enough for him to find some warmth. As Emily walked toward the office building, she was caught off guard when she saw him again, sitting on the same low concrete block outside the gate. He was still soaked from the rain, his clothes tattered and worn, but there was something different about him. He was sitting upright, his posture more dignified than the day before. When he heard Emily's footsteps, his head turned slightly, and he greeted her in the same calm, steady voice. "Rachel," he said, calling her by the name she had introduced herself with the day before. She smiled, slightly embarrassed, but happy to see him again. "James," she said softly. "I didn't expect to find you here." She paused, biting her lip. "You really should come inside. It's not much, but at least you'll be warm and dry for a while." James hesitated at first, clearly not wanting to impose, but Emily insisted. She didn't know what had compelled her, but she felt this deep need to help him to make sure he wasn't alone. With a quiet nod, James agreed, and together they walked to her apartment. The same small room that had always felt like a struggle to survive in Emily led him inside, guiding him carefully through the door, and helped him sit on the mattress. The room, though sparse, was a safe haven, and she hoped it would offer him a brief respite from the harsh world outside. She gave him a towel to dry off and made the last of the rice she had for dinner. James, for the first time, removed his dark glasses as he settled onto the bed. His eyes were clear and full of life, and Emily could see the faintest hint of surprise in his expression when he glanced around her modest room. "You have a good heart," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "I don't know what I would have done without you yesterday." Emily gave him a small smile and sat down next to him. "It's nothing," she replied, trying to brush it off. "Just something anyone would do." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "I just couldn't leave you there. People shouldn't be ignored, not when they're in need." James didn't say anything at first, but nodded as though understanding her more deeply than words could express. As the evening wore on, Emily and James talked quietly, the soft hum of the apartment's old heater, the only sound in the background. James shared that he had been homeless for some time, that life had not been kind to him, and that he had lost everything. Emily listened attentively, her heart aching for him, but also admiring his resilience. Despite everything, James was not bitter. He spoke with quiet grace, almost as if he had already come to terms with the harshness of the world. But as he spoke, Emily couldn't help but notice something strange. Although his appearance was unkempt and ragged, there was an air about him that didn't quite match his circumstances. James had a quiet confidence, an elegance to the way he carried himself, that was at odds with the way people treated him. Emily noticed it even more when he reached into his pocket and took out a silver watch, one that looked far too expensive to belong to someone in his situation. "That's a nice watch," Emily said, her voice laced with curiosity. She couldn't help but marvel at its design, the way the tiny diamonds on the band caught the light. It seemed like something someone with wealth and power would wear. not a man who had been living on the streets. James gave a small smile but didn't respond immediately. He simply put the watch back in his pocket, his expression softening. Emily, still unsure of his story, didn't press the issue. Instead, she handed him the plate of food she had prepared, her mind still racing with questions about him. James thanked her quietly, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than met the eye. Still, she didn't ask. It wasn't her place, and she knew that if he wanted to share his story, he would do so when he was ready. Over the following days, James continued to stay in Emily's apartment, and as she watched him, she began to notice how much he observed about the world around him. He wasn't just quietly existing in her space. He was studying her, learning about her in ways that went beyond surface-level observations. Emily, unaware of the depth of James's observations, found herself sharing more and more of her thoughts, her dreams, and even her fears. She never expected him to respond, but his silence spoke volumes. He seemed to have an uncanny understanding of her struggles, yet never judged Emily. On the other hand, continued to wonder about his true identity. There was no way that someone like him could be as poor as he appeared, not with the watch he wore, and yet he had never once flaunted his wealth or tried to impress her. To her, he was just James, the man who had experienced pain and loss, just like her. What Emily didn't know was that James was watching her with growing admiration. He had seen something in her that was rare and precious kindness that came without expectation. He had witnessed the way she lived her life, the humility she exhibited despite her own struggles, and he was deeply moved by it. In the midst of his own pain, Emily's selflessness shone like a beacon, reminding him of the goodness in people, the kind of goodness that could not be bought or sold. As the days passed, James knew that he was no longer just a man without a home. He had found something far more valuable, someone who saw him as a person, not as a beggar, someone who had given him the dignity he had lost long ago. And in that moment, as he watched Emily prepare another simple meal, he realized that he couldn't let her go. The kindness she had shown him had become a lifeline, and he would hold on to it with everything he had. Emily had been working at her job for a few weeks now, trying to keep a low profile and maintain a steady routine. Her days were filled with cleaning tasks, and though her work was humble, she was thankful for it. It provided her with the means to support herself, even if it was barely enough to cover the basics. But despite her best efforts, Emily couldn't escape the growing tension at the office. Her supervisor, Sarah, had always been cold toward her, but recently the hostility had intensified. Sarah often made snide remarks about Emily's appearance, her work ethic, and even her background, as if trying to make her feel small. Emily, ever the optimist, tried to brush it off, telling herself that she had a job to do and that the negativity couldn't touch her spirit. But Sarah's insults were wearing her down, and the pressure at work was becoming unbearable. One afternoon, as Emily was cleaning near Sarah's desk, she noticed a gold chain glinting under the corner of a drawer. She bent down to retrieve it, thinking it must have fallen from someone's desk, but as soon as Sarah entered the room and spotted the chain in Emily's hands, her demeanor shifted. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice, usually condescending, became sharp and accusatory. "What are you doing with that?" Sarah demanded, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Emily, startled by the sudden confrontation, tried to explain that she had just found the chain on the floor and was planning to return it. But Sarah wasn't having any of it. "You're just a cleaner," she sneered. "Why would anyone trust you with something valuable like this? You probably took it yourself. Stealing from this office is beneath us. Emily, don't think I won't report you." Emily's heart sank. She had never stolen anything in her life yet. Here she was being falsely accused and humiliated in front of her supervisor. The situation escalated quickly. Sarah stormed off to the management office, dragging Emily with her. The moment they stepped into the room, Sarah wasted no time in telling her side of the story, exaggerating every detail and twisting the facts to make Emily appear guilty. Emily, trembling and holding back tears, tried to speak to explain the truth. But the manager, Mr. Thompson, didn't give her a chance to defend herself. Instead, he waved her off, dismissing her claims. "We don't tolerate this kind of behavior at Stellar Group," Mr. Thompson said coldly. "You're fired. Gather your things and leave." Emily stood there in shock, her mind racing as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. She had worked hard to get this job, and now, in an instant, it was gone. As she walked out of the office, her heart heavy with the weight of the injustice, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of defeat. But just as she was about to step out into the street, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned around to find James standing silently behind her, his expression serious but kind. James had been watching the entire scene unfold from the back of the office. He had seen how Emily, despite the unfair accusations, had maintained her composure, never once raising her voice or retaliating. He had seen her kindness, her humility, and her unwavering belief in doing what was right, even when no one was looking. It struck him deeply how she had stood up for him when no one else had, how she had given him a place to stay when she had nothing to offer. And now, watching her walk away in disgrace, he knew that he couldn't let this injustice stand. He had been quietly observing everything for the past few days, taking in all the details, and he had made up his mind. It was time to reveal who he really was. Later that evening, as Emily sat alone in her small apartment, still reeling from the events of the day, she heard a knock on the door. She opened it cautiously, expecting maybe a neighbor or another visitor. But standing in front of her was James, looking completely different. Gone was the worn, blind man she had taken in. In his place stood a tall, confident man in a sharp suit, his posture dignified and commanding. He removed his dark glasses and smiled at her, but there was no mistaking it. This was the same man who had been sitting in her tiny apartment only hours ago. "James," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Who are you?" James smiled gently and stepped inside. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner." "Emily," he began, "but I needed to see the world through your eyes to understand the kind of person you are. My name is James Williams. I'm the CEO of Stellar Group." Emily's eyes widened in disbelief. The same company she had worked for, the same company that had just fired her. James continued, his voice steady and firm. "I've been watching everything, and I've seen how Sarah treated you. I've seen her cruelty, and I won't stand for it. You didn't deserve to be treated like that." Emily stood there stunned, trying to process the shock of what James was saying. I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you help me before?" James looked at her with soft eyes, his expression sincere. "Because I wanted to see your heart. Emily, I wanted to know who you really are, and what I saw was kindness, dignity, and a strength I can't ignore." He paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "I'm not going to let Sarah's actions go unchecked. Tomorrow I'll be confronting her, and I'm going to make sure she faces the consequences of her cruelty." Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. James, the man she had helped, was now standing in front of her as the very person she needed. She felt a rush of gratitude mixed with disbelief. The next day, James made good on his promise. He arrived at the office early, his presence commanding immediate attention. As he walked through the doors of Stellar Group, every employee stopped what they were doing to watch him. The whispers spread quickly, and Clara, who had been the one to mock and belittle Emily, stood frozen in place. James made his way to the center of the office where the staff had gathered, and his voice rang out with calm authority. "I've been watching the way you all treat one another," he began. "And I've seen how some of you treat people who you think are beneath you. Sarah, you've embarrassed this company with your actions, and it's time for that to stop." Sarah, who had been standing nearby, sneered at him. "You don't know anything about how things work here," she said. "You have no idea what it's like to work with people like her." James's eyes locked onto Sarah's, and he stepped forward, his voice unwavering. "I know exactly what it's like," he said calmly, "and I also know that the kind of behavior you've exhibited is unacceptable." With a single motion, James reached into his pocket and pulled out a folder. "Sarah, you're fired. Effective immediately." The room fell silent as Sarah's face went pale. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. "Your actions have consequences," James continued, "and I'm going to make sure the culture of kindness and respect stays in this company." James turned to the rest of the employees, his gaze steady and resolute. Let this be a lesson to all of you. We rise by lifting others, not by tearing them down. This company will stand for integrity, compassion, and hard work. With those final words, James left the office, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. As he stepped into the elevator, he turned to Emily, who had been watching from the back of the crowd. She stood there, a small smile on her face, realizing that the world was beginning to shift around her in ways she never thought possible. The next few days felt like a whirlwind for Emily. The shock of being fired from her job was still fresh, but in the midst of her despair, something miraculous had happened. James had not only revealed his true identity, but had also shown her an unexpected kindness that she couldn't have imagined. As if to confirm her growing sense of disbelief one evening, as Emily was organizing her meager belongings in her small apartment, James showed up at her door. This time he wasn't the man who had been struggling on the streets, the man she had helped with only the smallest of gestures. No, James Williams was standing there now in a tailored suit, his expression calm, yet filled with warmth. "Emily," he began softly, "I've been thinking about everything you've done for me, and I don't think words can truly express my gratitude." Emily blinked, her heart skipping a beat as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "James, you don't owe me anything," she said quickly, feeling a surge of humility. But James shook his head gently. "No. Emily, you've given me far more than I could ever repay. You've shown me what kindness truly means, even when you had nothing to give. You've been a beacon of light in a world that's often too dark, and I want to make sure that your light shines even brighter." He paused for a moment, watching her closely, as if weighing his next words carefully. "I want to offer you something more than just gratitude. I'd like to offer you a future—" Emily's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" James smiled, his eyes glinting with sincerity. "I want you to work with me. Emily, I want to offer you a position as my executive assistant at Stellar Group. You'll work directly with me, and I'll ensure that you're treated with the respect and recognition you deserve. No more cleaning floors. No more struggling to get by." Emily's heart raced as the words sunk in. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I am," James replied, "and that's not all." Emily's eyes widened as James continued his words, taking on a deeper, more personal tone. "I know you've dreamed of becoming a fashion designer. I've heard you talk about it. I want to help you make that dream a reality. I'll sponsor your education pay for you to attend the best fashion school, whether it's here or abroad. You deserve the chance to follow your passion. Emily, you've given so much to others. It's time for you to give to yourself." Emily was speechless, her emotions a tangled web of gratitude, disbelief, and awe. She had never imagined a life like this, had never thought that anyone, especially someone like James, would see her potential and offer her such an incredible opportunity. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her hands trembling as she wiped away tears. James stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to say anything, Emily. Just know that you have a future now and it's yours to shape. But I want to ask you one more thing." Emily looked up at him, her eyes wide, her heart thudding in her chest. "What is it?" James hesitated for just a moment before speaking, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want you to know that I'm offering you this, not just out of gratitude. There's more, Emily." He took a deep breath. "I admire you. I've come to see something in you that I've never seen in anyone else. The strength you carry, the kindness that radiates from your heart, and your incredible inner beauty. And I've come to realize that I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment everything else seemed to fade away. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she processed what James had just said. She had always seen him as someone she could never truly understand, a man with everything she could never have, but here he was standing in front of her, vulnerable and sincere. He had opened up in a way no one had ever done for her before. And in that moment, Emily realized that perhaps the feeling wasn't so one-sided after all. "I love you too," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling with emotion. James smiled, his eyes filled with warmth and affection. "I'm glad to hear that." he whispered, his voice soft but full of intent, "because I've been waiting for the right moment to ask you something important. Emily, will you marry me?" The question hung in the air like a dream she had never dared to dream. Emily stood there staring at James in disbelief, her heart racing. Was this really happening? This man who had been nothing but kind and generous to her was asking her to spend the rest of her life with him. She didn't know how long they stood there, both lost in the moment, but eventually Emily found her voice a quiet, yet firm answer slipping from her lips. "Yes, James. Yes, I will." James's face lit up with a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. He gently took her hands in his thumb brushing over her skin in a way that felt comforting, reassuring. "I've waited for this moment for so long," he murmured, his voice filled with emotion. "And now we can finally begin our new life together." The days that followed were a blur of excitement and planning. Emily's life was changing in ways she had never imagined. She began working closely with James at Stella Group, gaining recognition for her dedication and talent. Every day she felt more fulfilled, more alive than she ever had before, but what truly made her heart swell with joy was the way James treated her, always with respect, always with admiration. And as they spent more time together, Emily couldn't help but fall deeper in love with him. Then one evening, as the sun began to set, James took Emily to a rooftop overlooking the city skyline. The air was cool, the lights of the city twinkling below them, casting a soft glow over everything. James led Emily to a small table set for two, where a candle flickered in the soft breeze. The scene was intimate, romantic, a perfect moment for the two of them. As they sat together, James reached across the table and took Emily's hand. "I'm the luckiest man in the world," he said softly, "because I have you." Emily smiled, her heart full of love. "And I'm the luckiest woman," she whispered back. As they sat there together, surrounded by the beauty of the evening, Emily knew that her life had been transformed forever. The pain of her past had led her here to this moment, to this man who had shown her the power of love, kindness, and second chances. And as they shared a quiet moment, Emily realized that this was only the beginning of their beautiful journey together. The next chapter in their lives had just begun. The day had finally arrived. The day Emily Johnson would walk down the aisle in a gown she had designed herself, the culmination of years of dreams, hard work, and countless sacrifices. It was a dream she had almost given up on, but now, as she stood in front of the full-length mirror, she couldn't believe how far she had come. The wedding was not just a celebration of her love for James, but a reflection of everything she had achieved. The dress, a beautiful design made from soft silk and intricate lace, fit her perfectly, and for the first time in her life, Emily felt truly at home in her own skin. She had gone from being a girl who could barely scrape by, struggling to make ends meet, to a woman with the power to shape her own future, supported by a love so deep and unwavering. As Emily stood there adjusting her dress, she caught a glimpse of James standing by the door, his eyes filled with admiration. James, in his sharp suit, looked every bit the billionaire CEO he was, but there was a softness in his eyes that showed his love for Emily was genuine and all-encompassing. "You look perfect," he whispered. Stepping closer, his voice was tender and his hand gently brushed against her arm. Emily smiled, feeling an overwhelming rush of emotion. The journey they had shared, the struggles, the kindness, the sacrifices had led to this moment, and now she was about to marry the man who had shown her that dreams could come true. "Thank you," she whispered back, her voice cracking slightly. "I never imagined this day would come." The ceremony itself was nothing short of magical, held in a beautiful garden surrounded by blooming flowers and soft golden sunlight. Emily walked down the aisle with a sense of peace she had never known before. Her heart raced, but not out of anxiety. She was walking toward her future, a future she had built with her own hands, alongside a man who cherished her for everything she was. The guests, many of whom had known Emily from her humble beginnings, watched with wide eyes, astonished by the transformation they were witnessing. She was no longer the cleaner they had known. She was the bride of the CEO, the woman who had touched everyone around her with her kindness, her compassion, and her strength. Among the guests was Sarah, the supervisor, who had once humiliated Emily, belittling her in front of others and making her feel small and insignificant. Sarah stood in the back, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on Emily as she made her way down the aisle. There was no smile on Sarah's face, no warmth in her eyes, only a hard, calculating stare. She had watched Emily's rise from afar, dismissing it at first as a fluke, but now seeing Emily standing here in the arms of James, Sarah couldn't deny the change. Emily had risen above it all, above the cruelty, the hardships, and the judgment, while Sarah remained stagnant in her own bitterness. In that moment, Sarah realized just how wrong she had been about Emily. The woman she had once looked down upon had become everything Sarah could never be. Emily reached the altar where James stood waiting for her, his eyes shining with love and pride. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with heartfelt vows and promises of a future built on love, respect, and shared dreams. As they exchanged rings, Emily felt a sense of peace settle in her heart, knowing that this was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one filled with endless possibilities. The guests stood and applauded as they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, and in that moment, Emily realized that all the struggles, all the pain had led her to this place of fulfillment and joy. As the night went on, the celebration continued with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Emily's friends, who had supported her throughout her journey, surrounded her, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for all the love she had received. She had always believed that kindness could change the world, but she had never imagined that her own acts of kindness would lead her to this moment of pure happiness. She had started as a woman with nothing, a woman who cleaned floors and sold goods just to survive, but now she was a woman who had everything: love, respect, and a future filled with hope. As the evening came to a close, Emily stood outside the venue with James, watching the stars twinkle above. They were alone for a moment, just the two of them, surrounded by the stillness of the night. James wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. "We have so much ahead of us, Emily. Together we can accomplish anything." Emily smiled, her heart overflowing with love. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll be with you every step of the way." The story of Emily's transformation from a humble cleaner to a respected woman had come full circle. But it wasn't just about the transformation itself. It was about the power of kindness. It was about the belief that even the smallest act of compassion could change the course of someone's life. Emily had shown the world that love, when given freely, could lead to unimaginable success and happiness. And as she stood there in James's arms, looking up at the stars, she knew that her story was just beginning, a story of love, kindness, and dreams coming true. If you enjoyed Emily's inspiring journey, make sure to hit the subscribe button and join us on more transformative stories at Deep Inside HQ. Our channel brings you incredible stories of resilience, kindness, and the power of selflessness. Don't forget to like, comment, and share to spread the message of hope and love. Stay tuned for more heartwarming stories, and remember, every act of kindness can change the world. Let's continue to inspire each other, one story at a time.